So I've mentioned this guy to you before, Yuval Harari. How many of you have read some of his stuff? Yeah, so just a couple, three. So very quickly, this is all I know about the guy. He is, I guess you'd say, a public intellectual. He teaches at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He's written 3 amazing books. The first one is called Sapiens, and it's a history of humanity. The second one is called Homo Deus, the divine human. And the third one is called 21 Questions for the 21st Century. And the books are big, except for the last one. If you want to understand what he's talking about, just read the last one. But buy all 3, because they're very impressive to your friends. You don't have to read them. You just put them somewhere where they can see them. Ooh, you read those? So, here's the basic idea that he presents, and that is relevant to our talk. One of the major things that separates humans from animals is the human capacity to live in a fictional reality. All right? I'm going to say it 3 times because I got time to kill. One of the things that distinguishes people from animals is that we have the capacity to live in fiction. Not just to appreciate it, but to live in it. So, for example, I don't know if any of you are Sherlock Holmes fans. I am. I've read the entire canon. I've read it a couple times. I read all the secondary, the people who write the fan fiction about Sherlock Holmes. Watched most, if not all, of the movies, television shows. I like Sherlock Holmes. If you go to London, Sherlock Holmes' office, or his suite of rooms, was, who knows?
221.
Yes, right, so we do have 221B Baker Street. And you can go to 221B Baker Street in London now, and his rooms are there. You can pay a fee, and you can go upstairs, and you can see where he lived. Except, of course, he didn't, because he isn't real. But his stuff is there. And you can read all of these biographies about him, which is odd, because he isn't real. And there are whole societies called Sherlock societies where they debate the minutiae of his life, which is odd, because he isn't real. Only people do that. Only people do that. And we don't just do it with Sherlock Holmes. I mean, you could be a Harry Potter fanatic. I don't know what they're called, maybe potheads. I'm not sure. I just made that up, I'm not sure. But they argue about the different houses in Hogwarts. And they take that so seriously that it almost becomes literal. Now, I'm sure if you asked most rational Sherlockians or potheads or whatever they're called, and you ask them, is it real? They'll say no. Of course not. We know it's not real. But they suspend that knowledge, they put it aside, and enter into the story so completely that they become very real. I don't know. I don't know how. It's not a virtual reality anymore. It's a real to them. Only people can do that. If people couldn't do that, according to Yuval Harari, human civilization could not exist. Human civilization rests on shared fictions. And in his books, he lists a number of them, but one of the ones that is most impressive, I guess, to me, is the fiction of money, paper money. So you can go to a bonobo or a chimp and you can trade with them. You have a banana and you can trade a banana for a coconut. You can get them to understand what you want, and they might make the change. But if the chimp has a banana and you've got a $50 bill, and you say, here, give me the banana, I'm going to give you $50. The chimp doesn't want your $50 bill. So maybe it's not enough. You can up it to a $100 bill. You could give the chimp a $500 note, if there is such a thing. I've never seen one, but maybe there is. You could write a check for $10,000, the chimp is never going to be impressed enough to give you her banana. The reason is the chimp doesn't live in the story world of paper money. If you offer me $50 for a banana, not only will I give you my banana, but I'll go to the supermarket and buy a lot more and keep selling them to you for $50. Because I have a story in my head that says that little green piece of paper with the number 50 on it is actually worth something more than a piece of paper with print on it. I can't eat it. I can't build with it. I can't do anything with it other than operate in an economic story that imbues that denomination of bill with meaning. Chimps don't get it. Bonobos don't get it. Right? They'll never be rich because they don't get it. Of course, they have no concept of rich either, but that's another story. If we didn't have the story of money, we couldn't have trade, we couldn't have, on a massive scale, we couldn't have, if we didn't believe in the power of story, civilization as you and I know it. We live in a time, Harari says, when two things are happening story-wise. One is the old stories are crumbling. And two, now I used to say, until I read this book, the old stories are crumbling and we haven't got a new story yet. A lot of people say that. But he's saying the old story is crumbling and you can see the emergence of a new story and it is not good. We're going to talk about that a little bit. All right. So we live in this storied reality. It's most prevalent, well, I'm saying it's most prevalent, you could argue this, but it's certainly prevalent in the world of religion. Religion is just story. Right? There's no, I mean, even if you could prove that Jesus was an actual human being, a Jewish guy born into Roman-occupied Palestine in the 1st century, even if you could prove that, and I don't think that's really debatable. I think there is enough evidence to say there was someone named Jesus. He led some small movement of political, maybe certainly spiritual revolutionaries back in the 1st century. You can prove that. You cannot prove what really matters in the world of Christianity, which is the story about Jesus, the virgin birth, the miracle working, the resurrection after he was crucified. Those things are pure story. Now I was going to say pure fiction, but for some people, yeah, it's a story, but it isn't fiction. Right? Now they're not Sherlockians, they're Christians. Right? They take the story as history. And all you have to do is look at the history of Western civilization and you can see the power of that story. Now Jesus himself was born with a story. He was born with the Jewish story. Assuming that he didn't reject the story as fiction, and nobody even had the concept of doing that back then. So assuming he didn't reject the story as fiction, but simply put his own spin on the meaning of the story, he believed in a creator God who created the world in 6 days, who flooded it out and killed everyone except for Noah, his wife, and their couple of kids. He believed that there was a judgment day coming. He believed that God saved the Jews from the Egyptian slavery and split the Red. He believed in all that stuff. And maybe, though this is very iffy, he believed that he was in the line of those prophets and that he was in fact the chosen one or the anointed one or the Messiah of God, the God who did all those things in those stories. And he was part of this ongoing story. We don't know if he believed that or not, but we could surmise, without, I would say, too much equivocation, that he bought into the stories into which he was born, as did almost everybody else. who lived there at his time. It wasn't something you questioned. It was something in which you lived. The story was your entire environment. The whole struggle between Roman occupation, or the Roman religion, and earlier the Hellenistic religion of the Greeks, and Judaism, as opposed to the struggle between Rome and Jews. Roman Jews' struggle was mostly around taxation. The Romans wanted it, the Jews didn't want it. But when it got into the religion category, that struggle was a struggle of stories. There's no, in my mind, there's no reality behind it. It's just a struggle of stories. It's like the house of Slytherin versus the house of
Gryffindor.
Okay, so we have potheads. So it's and people divide themselves by we don't have the magic hat, so you don't know what house you'd be in. But people divide themselves up into different houses. Oh, I'm definitely a Slytherin person, or I'm definitely a something. Just the way you divide yourself up according to Myers-Briggs story. Oh, I'm an INTJ. Or I'm an EFNP, or whatever, ENFP. We just have these stories about reality, and then we fit ourselves into these various boxes. If you're into the Enneagram, it's another story. If you're into astrology, it's another story. Now, you may believe these things work. I'm not saying they don't. I'm simply saying they don't. So, but they're stories. If you believe it, you believe it. I mean, your Unitarians are supposed to be rational, but really, who's rational? So you believe what you believe. But I'm simply saying they're stories. Now, I can't remember the woman's name, but I was interviewing her. It's a good thing I write it down when I have these interviews. I was interviewing her for my show, Essential Conversations on the Edge. And we were talking about astrology. Oh no, I'm sorry, this is a future interview, it's scheduled. And I want to talk to her about something she writes in her book on astrology. And that's where she says, look, it's not that the stars control your life. It's that we use the shape of the stars and the houses and all that other stuff in astrology as archetypes to understand who we are. Archetypes are just stories. So we look for a story that with which we resonate, and then we try to explain our life and our interactions with other people by means of the archetype. It is brilliant, even if it's not true. It's brilliant, because that's how people live. We live in three realities. The reality of external engagement, with trees and rocks and bears and one another. We live with an internal reality, my own dreams, my own feelings, all the sensations that I have, thoughts and feelings that I have going on all day long. And then we live on this third dimension, the dimension of shared fiction. Now, if it's not shared fiction, if it's not shared fiction, then you're insane. Right? That's a definition of insanity. You live in a fictional world all by yourself. Right? If you have a lot of people who share your fiction, it went from being insanity to being a movement. And if you get enough people to believe in it, it becomes a religion or a philosophy or whatever. So, the difference between a religion and a cult. A cult is when you move from your private insanity into a group sanity, right? Because enough people believe it. And the difference between a religion and a cult is that a cult gets so many people involved in it that they have a lot of money. And then it becomes a religion. So, because religion is all about power and money. You didn't realize that. Religion is all about power and money. So you buy into the story. I'll give you a concrete example. So in the book of Acts, and of course you're all experts on these things, but in the book of Acts, there is a marvelous fundraising story. When do you do fundraising here? Do you have like a fundraising? I know we have a box that you didn't even know was there.
We have the
yard sale.
yard sale.
Oh, that's the big fundraiser? Yeah, okay. All right, so, okay, fine. That's why we don't have whatever we need. This is an aside. Because my synagogue, for 20 years I had a synagogue, and we had a big yard sale every year. It was the weirdest thing. And people would bring all their junk, and then they would buy other people's junk. And then the next year, they'd bring that junk back. And the people who gave the junk up 2 years ago rebuy their junk because they forgot that it was junk. So it's a weird phenomenon. It's a fundraiser.
Just another story.
It's just another story. But you forget the story was, who needs this piece of crap? And then 2 years later, go, oh, look at this, I need this. So, the best fun, if you ever did real fundraising, like you stood up here and you said, we have got to, right? The best fundraising story is in the book of Acts. Peter, because the early churches seem somewhat communistic, not simply in the fact that they share everything, but because there's an authoritarian leader who controls the money. So Peter was that guy. And there's a couple, now their names escape me at the moment, maybe someone knows, but there's a couple who sell their property to give the money to the church. But they're practical. They're a little hesitant to give everything to the church, so they hold back a little bit just in case they need the money to survive. So they give, I don't know, I'm making it up, 90%, 80% to Peter for use in the early church. So the guy, the husband, brings the money to Peter. We don't know where his wife is at the moment. So do you know this story? Do you know the names? I can't remember their names. I just totally blanked. So the husband brings the money, and Peter says, is this all the money you got from the sale of your property? And the guy lies, and he says yes. And then Peter, I don't know how he knows, but he knows that the guy's lying, and he says, you're in league with the devil, and you're keeping money from God, and this is, you'll be punished for this, and then the guy has a heart attack and dies on the spot. It's a great fundraising system, but it gets better. So then, we don't know who they are, because these young men come from, we're just sitting there when this is happening, and they take the guy's body, and they drag him out, and they bury him. A little later in the day, the guy's wife shows up. And Peter calls her over and he says, your husband was here. Doesn't tell her what happened to him, because your husband was here. And he gave us the money from the sale of your property. Did he give us all the money? And she says, yeah. Yeah. Now, she's in on the fact that he didn't. So she also, it's not like she assumed he did, but no, she knows he didn't. So she also lies to Peter. And Peter goes apoplectic again. And he says, your husband made the same lie, and he had a heart attack, and he died on the very spot you're standing. And she goes, heart attack, dead. And the same four guys who just live for this kind of thing drag her out and bury her. So if it wasn't a great story, it wouldn't be in the book of Acts, and we wouldn't be reading it for 2,000 years. It's a great story because it's a motivator. Right? The preacher says, God spoke to me and says, this just happened a couple of years ago, I need a new jet. My old jet is not good. It was Creflo Dollar, I think. And Creflo Dollar, aptly named guy, not the Creflo part, but Creflo Dollar, if I have my preacher right, said that God came to him in a dream or in a vision and said, your old airplane, your private jet, it's just not keeping up with the Joneses of the Pentecost, the gospel, prosperity gospel world. You need a better jet. And so he went to his congregation and he said, God said, I need a better jet, and of course you've got to give me the money to get a better jet, and if you're giving it to me, you're really giving it to God, because God wants me to have the jet. And he didn't, they bought into the whole story so powerfully. He didn't need to pull out the big guns of Aeneas, and that's the guy's name, and his wife.
Sapphira.
Is it?
Ananias and Sapphira?
Yeah, Ananias and Sapphira, right. So, good name. good memory.
He's using his cell phone.
Oh,
I've been sitting here the whole time.
Now, knew it. When I taught at MTSU, which I did for 10 years, all my colleagues said, tell them to turn their cell phones off. I didn't. I said, no, leave them on, because I'm not going to remember everything. And maybe something I say is wrong. You got to fact check me on the spot, because I don't mind being corrected. So thank you for filling that in. So he didn't even have to use that story, but it is a great story because it instills fear. The best religion stories always instill fear. They tell you religion is about love, but really the stories are scaring you to death, right? I mean, even Jesus, when he takes the demonic spirit out of people and he sends them into pigs, and the pigs run off a cliff. You know, you go, I could be a pig. You know, if Jesus wants, I could be a pig. Or when he talks about separating the sheep and the goats. Nobody wants to be a goat. So the stories are loving, compassionate, but don't be a goat, because the goats die. So the best stories are fear-based stories. But they're not the only stories we live by, because we don't only live by religion stories. Harari says that the stories that have motivated us for thousands of years are collapsing. He points to science as a major cause of this collapse. Now, there are some people in philosophy departments and English departments who will argue, this is from 20th century French philosophy, that all of things are stories. Nothing is real. Science is a story, right? There's nothing real about science. That's absurd, right? I mean, here in Huntsville, you put rockets in the air. It's not that you sit around and imagine, now let's just imagine, big penis-like object firing off. I mean, that's not how it works. You actually have to build the thing, set it on, you know, turn it on, and see if it goes. And hopefully it goes where it's supposed to go, but you'll know if it doesn't. Science is not fiction. Explaining science may need, the elements of story, and some scientific breakthroughs seem to come from some kind of story level of imagination, like Kekulé and the double helix. He dreamt the thing, or Einstein and relativity. He imagined what it'd be like to ride a beam of light into space, and he sort of worked it out on a imaginal level before he proved it mathematically. But by and large, science actually has to do what science says. No one takes science on faith, right? Well, I should say no, but you shouldn't take science on faith. It's a proof, it's a either prove it or disprove it, or hold off on making a claim until you can do one or the other. Religion is not like that. Religion is you believe the story, because if you don't, you die, either in this world or the next, or you're tortured in the next. So they're very, very different things. Harari says that science is undermining the story of religion. He's not talking about the deconstruction movement that says science is just a story, everything is just a story, there is no reality. People say, oh, you create your own reality. Sure. And if you're the only one creating that reality, you create it in an insane asylum. If you get enough people to share that reality, okay, now you got a cult. And maybe if you're lucky, enough people will go insane with you and you'll have a religion. But the science is not the same kind of thing. Science is testable, religion is not testable. Even though religion makes scientific claims, inadvertently. Jesus, I once had in one of my classes, I invited a Catholic priest to come and explain Catholicism to the kids, and I don't know, I was in a mood or something, I don't know. Let me ask you a question. You believe Jesus was raised bodily from the dead and taken up into heaven? He goes, yeah. I said, all right, so heaven is beyond the universe that you and I know, right? He goes, yeah. So what we know scientifically about the ability of physical entities to move the speed of light and all, being a limitation. Jesus is somewhere, he hasn't even left the galaxy yet. He's still going. He hasn't gotten it just takes too long. So when you raise that kind of issue, you can come up with different things. You can talk about warp speed. You can talk about, folding space. I don't know, you can come up with different things. And that's what he did. He said, well, no, it's God. God can do whatever he wants. God can do whatever he, big H, he, wants. It's a miracle. So if God wants to overcome the laws of physics, that's fine, because God invented them. All right. So you cannot disprove, you can't catch religion in a lie. Because they'll just come up with, it's like the president. They'll just say something else. And it's just, look over here, don't, okay. So I don't agree with Harari that science is really going to do, is going to bring the end of religion. Or even that science is undermining our story. There's other things that are undermining the story, but and we can talk about maybe what you think some of those are in the second hour. So, Harari says that where we're going in the future, because his first book is about the human past, second book is about Homo Deus, we become gods ourselves and where we're going. So, I'm just going to read this to you because it's easier to read what he wrote about the future of religion. He says, in the 21st century, we will create more powerful fictions and more totalitarian religions than in any previous era. Now, they go together. The more powerful fictions are going to derive their power from even more totalitarian regimes, constructs. And they're going to feed each other. So the religion draws its power from the totalitarianism, and then the totalitarianism draws its power from the religion. It's just going to be a feedback loop. And we're going to be, I was going to say we're going to be entrapped in it or trapped in it, but really we're going to create it and then create our own trap. Something that's not unique to us, and it certainly is unique to the 21st century. When I first started my Zen training, one of my teachers said, and I'll give this to you, it's a koan, one of those puzzles that you can't really solve. Here's what he said. So, imagine a giant corral with a huge gate. And in the corral are a dozen cows. And the gate is open, and the cows are leaving the corral to go to the barn to get some food. The first 11 cows pass through without a problem. The 12th cow gets its tail caught and can't get out of the corral. Where is the cow's tail caught? We have 45 minutes.
Can you repeat that?
Yes. Okay. Dun, 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 dun. So, you have a giant corral, 12 cows inside, huge gate, right? No, big gate. The cows are leaving. 11 cows go through. 1 cow gets stuck by its tail. Where does the cow get stuck? Under its foot. Okay, under its foot. Where else? How much did you bet on that one? Under its foot.
Atom bit it.
What?
Atom bit it. It's all atoms and molecules, and something grabbed him.
Oh, okay.
Stuck in the gate.
Stuck in the gate?
Yeah.
All right. So, you can come up with a million things, right? He stepped on his tail. It's under his foot. Some atomic fluky thing happened. Whatever you want to come up with. The answer is, and most koans don't have a really official answer, but he was trying to make a point. The answer is, it's stuck in your head. I told you that there's a corral, but there isn't. I told you there were 12 cows, but there aren't. I told you 11 cows got through and one didn't. But that's just a story. And then you said, okay, let's go with the story. We're all living with a big corral and a giant gate, 12 cows, and one gets stuck. And now we're going to have a whole debate. Now, if this was like a Talmudic academy, we would be arguing, it can't be that it's stuck on its tail. No, of course, it's got to be right. And we would have all these debates going on. But it's stuck in your head because you bought into the story. Harari goes back and looks at the evolution of religion. He says the big shift came when religions wrote their stories in books. Because prior to that, we had to remember all the stories. And you could remember them differently. And so you could make changes in the organizational structure. But once you wrote them down, the stories were fixed. And then you could argue about them, but you had to deal with the fixed story. And the problem with the fixed story, I'm saying problem. One of the things that develops from a fixed story is now you have a fixed clergy, experts in that story. So in the early church, when people couldn't read, the story was in stained glass windows in the church. And the only people who could read were the clergy. And they were the only ones who could really interpret the story for you. The big Protestant revolution was the printing press, everyone gets their Bible, everyone should read it for her or himself, and then you have a zillion different denominations because everyone has a different take on it. But earlier it was pretty totalitarian, and out of this fixed story comes a fixed clergy, and the clergy becomes the power center. Not just in religion, but religion links to the military, and it links to economics, and it runs the whole the whole of human society. Harari then says the clergy could be a problem if they have children. Because now you've got a story, and the story brings in all kinds of money, and now you've got kids, and they all want a piece of the pie. So he says the most powerful religions have celibate clergy in order to make sure that the church, or the whatever the organization is, keeps all the money. Because you have no one to give it to. Now, they're celibate officially, they're not necessarily really celibate. They may have children, but the children cannot be owned. They have no claim on the wealth of or power of the institution. So he claims that's where we get celibate clergy from. And you get celibate clergy not in Judaism, but Judaism was never a major money maker, right? But you get, sorry?
Catholicism.
You get in Catholicism, you get celibate clergy in forms of Buddhism, even in Hinduism, but the big money is in these globalist religions, and they have this celibate clergy. That's his argument. So we're moving away from the old story. We're moving maybe away from celibate clergy. We're arguing over the money in the churches and the synagogues and all the rest of that, but mostly the churches because they're more tightly organized. And his argument isn't that it's all going to fall away, it's that a new story is going to come that's even more totalitarian than the previous stories. So, read it again. In the 21st century, we'll create more powerful fictions and more totalitarian religions than in any previous era. It goes on. With the help of biotechnology and computer algorithms, these religions will not only control our minute-by-minute existence, but will be able to shape our bodies, brains, and minds, and to create entire virtual worlds complete with hells and heavens. Being able to distinguish fiction from reality and religion from science will therefore become more difficult and at the same time more vital than before. So he sees a merger of science, talking about biotech and AI, with religion in a totalitarian setting that is just going to make life unbelievably oppressive. Now his hope is that we've got to be able to distinguish science from religion. I don't think we can. Religion has been with us longer than science, but even if that weren't the case, I don't think people are capable of really distinguishing faux reality from, I don't know, real reality. And in fact, most of us would rather escape into a fictional reality. So his solution, which is really scientific education so we can tell the difference, I'm not sure is going to work. Last point, and then we'll wrap it up and we'll talk more about it later. He doesn't say this, but now I'm spinning off what he's saying. He says we're going to get these new totalitarian stories. I don't know if that is preordained, for a foregone conclusion, not preordained, a foregone conclusion. Knowing what he's just told us, could we not, do we not have the capacity to create a different kind of story? I want to say yes, but, and then I'm going to end. In Jonathan Safran Foer's new book, it's called The Weather is You, and it's all about climate disaster, the coming climate disaster. He has this whole section, and he says, everyone knows, whether we say it or not, everyone knows we're going into climate hell, the sixth great extinction. Everyone knows that. But no one can do anything about it. And the reason that no one can, or no one does do anything about it, is the people who really understand it haven't figured out how to tell it to us in a way that is story powerful. We need, people live on story. We need to create a story that motivates. The story of Aeneas and, what was her name?
Ananias and Sapphira.
Sapphira, yeah. So the story of the two people who held back a little bit of money, that's a motivator, right? Because they died. You'd think that the sixth great extinction would be a motivator because we die. But according to Safran Foer, it's not told in a compelling, storied way. And so people say, oh, I understand that. I even believe in that, but I can't do anything about it because, and people don't say this overtly, but he says, because there's no story pushing. So we need a new kind of story. A story that is not totalitarian, a story that is individually and communally liberating, a story that honors person and planet and all the animals and all the rest of it. We need a new story, and we've got about
7 years.
Well, you're being optimistic. We got to, because I just read a report that said by 2020, if we don't fix this, it's too late. Happy New Year. So we need our story, and we need it fast. And I think that's not going to come from traditional religions. If it comes from religion at all, it's going to come from places like this, and not from the evangelicals and those kinds of fundamentalist religions. So I'm just going to leave it there, and we'll pick it up in the second hour and see if you can solve the problem.